Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you. I never expected to face off against a homeowners association, let alone get tangled up with the police in the process. But here I am. My name is Jessica, and I recently moved in with my 85-year-old aunt, Linda, who lives in a gated community known for its strict HOA rules. Aunt Linda needed help with day-to-day tasks, and I needed a place to stay while saving up for my own apartment. It seemed like a perfect arrangement, until Karen, that's what everyone in the neighborhood calls her, decided to make our lives a living nightmare. Aunt Linda has some mobility issues. She's not in a wheelchair or anything, but after a hip replacement and bouts of arthritis, she struggles getting around. One of the biggest challenges for her is personal grooming, showering, hair washing, things like that. A friend of mine from nursing school suggested I install a portable shampoo basin in the garage, where it would be easier for Aunt Linda to lean back and avoid risking a fall in the tight bathroom shower. It's a simple, collapsible setup, the kind you see in some in-home care settings. There's no big remodel, no permanent changes to the property, nothing that could violate any major guidelines. Or so I thought. The first time Karen saw me rolling a black salon chair into the garage, she stopped her sedan in the middle of the road. She hopped out, marched right up, and demanded to know what I was sneaking in there. I tried to explain it was just a portable station so I could wash Aunt Linda's hair without endangering her in the slippery bathroom tub. Karen put her hands on her hips, scanning the folded chair and basin as if I'd smuggled contraband. "Are you operating some kind of business?" she asked, her tone accusatory. "This community doesn't allow commercial activity in residences." I told her no, but she only gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. She stormed off, muttering something about making a report. I shrugged it off at first, feeling it was just an overreaction, maybe she was having a bad day. After all, I wasn't violating any rule I'd read in the thick HOA handbook. Aunt Linda told me Karen had a reputation for being petty, sending out emails about the most random stuff. The shade of mulch in people's flowerbeds, the length of time a trash can stay on the curb after pickup day, or even the pattern of holiday lights in December. Still, I thought I could fly under the radar if I just minded my own business. A few days later, I got home from a grocery run to see a bright orange notice taped on Aunt Linda's front door. The bold letters at the top read, "HOA compliance violation." My heart sank. According to the notice, we were being fined for unapproved modifications and the operation of a personal service business within the community. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the shampoo station in the garage or risk escalating fines and possible legal action. I marched inside, furious. Aunt Linda was in the living room, perplexed and a bit shaken. She said Karen had pounded on the door earlier, insisting Aunt Linda stop this nonsense or face the consequences. Imagine being harassed in your own home over something as harmless as a collapsible shampoo basin. But we had little time to stew over it because a second letter arrived via certified mail the next day, restating the demands in more formal language. I decided to call the HOA office. It turned out Karen chaired the Architectural Compliance Committee, and apparently, she had flagged our salon setup as a major infraction. The woman on the phone from the HOA seemed indifferent, almost amused, when I tried explaining that I was just helping my aunt with personal hygiene. "Well, if it's truly for personal use, there shouldn't be an issue," she said. "But Karen insists you're running a side business." She claimed the board would be discussing it at the next meeting but advised me to clear up any misconceptions by taking down the station in the meantime. I was livid but determined not to let Aunt Linda lose her simple, safe way to get her hair washed. Ignoring the notice felt risky. Getting hammered by more fines or forced to appear in court wasn't appealing, but the alternative was letting Aunt Linda struggle. When I told her I was thinking about removing the basin to placate Karen, Aunt Linda clenched her jaw in that stubborn way I'd seen 100 times. "Don't you dare," she said firmly. "I may be old, but I still have my pride. And my freedom." We decided to stand our ground. We'd gather documents and a note from Aunt Linda's doctor verifying the need for special accommodations. That way, if the HOA pressed further, we'd have evidence we weren't turning the garage into a business. I still hoped it wouldn't go that far. But just as Aunt Linda and I made this plan, Karen fired off another salvo. A certified letter arrived stating that if we did not remove the unauthorized salon within 5 business days, the HOA would escalate the matter to the fullest extent. We both suspected that meant more than just a scolding. Around here, the HOA is known to bring actual lawsuits for far smaller infractions. I was worried sick. Aunt Linda tried to reassure me, they can't stop you from helping an old lady wash her hair. But I noticed how she gripped the arms of her chair a little tighter, fear behind her stubborn front. On day 6, one day past the deadline, we woke up to 2 surprise visitors. One was Karen, a smug look on her face. The other was a police officer in uniform, standing at the door. My stomach flipped, Aunt Linda's face went pale. We had no idea why an officer would be involved. But I guess for Karen, harassment by mail wasn't enough. She decided to bring the cops in for her next power move, and neither of us knew how bad things were about to get. Do you have any form of business license? The officer asked the moment I opened the door. Behind him, Karen stood with her arms folded, her lips pursed in triumph. Inside, Aunt Linda sat in the living room, eyeing them with a mix of confusion and anxiety. Business license, I said, baffled. I'm just helping my aunt with her personal care. I don't have a license for that because I'm not running a business. Karen immediately piped up. She's been advertising a salon in the neighborhood, she told the officer, jabbing a finger in my direction. There's no telling who she's bringing in here or what kind of damage she's causing. It's unsafe, unsanitary, and against HOA guidelines. In that moment, I realized Karen was either delusional or flat-out lying. Advertising? I haven't advertised anything, I fired back. No business cards, no flyers, nothing. This is just for my aunt's convenience. The officer, looking more exasperated by the second, asked if we could step into the garage so he could see exactly what was going on. Aunt Linda insisted on coming along, and I helped her up carefully. Karen tried to follow, but the officer held up a hand, telling her to wait. She glared daggers at me as I helped Aunt Linda shuffle across the house. Once inside the garage, I showed the officer the portable shampoo basin. It was folded up against a wall, along with a small rolling cart that held shampoo, towels, and a hairdryer, basically a simple personal care setup. This is it, I said, trying not to sound too defensive. There's no commercial signage, no cash register, no separate entrance, no outside customers. Aunt Linda nodded, emphasizing she doesn't have the dexterity or balance to wash her hair safely in the shower. To my relief, the officer seemed sympathetic. He asked Aunt Linda a few questions about her health. She explained her hip replacement, the arthritis, and how she nearly slipped in the bathtub a month ago. This setup was her lifeline for independence. It spared her a humiliating trip to a public salon every time she needed a basic wash and set. The officer gave me a small, understanding nod, then stepped out of the garage. Outside, Karen was pacing like she expected to see a row of salon chairs and waiting customers lining the driveway. When the officer emerged, his tone with her was notably cooler. He explained that, from what he could see, there was no sign of a business, and no probable cause to take any action against me or Aunt Linda. Karen's face fell. She tried to argue that the HOA rules forbid any equipment that could constitute a commercial setup, but the officer replied that he was only concerned with potential criminal violations or safety hazards. So you're not shutting this down? Karen demanded. It's out of my jurisdiction, the officer said with a shrug. If you have a civil dispute through the HOA, you can handle it in civil court. But there's no crime here. Seeing her plans fizzle made Karen furious. She shot me a glare that practically promised retribution. The officer left soon after, and I could feel Karen's eyes boring into the back of my head as I escorted Aunt Linda inside. Sure enough, a few days later, we got an official email from the HOA scheduling a mandatory compliance hearing. The notice said I was expected to attend and provide evidence against allegations of running an unauthorized business. The date was set for 2 weeks out, and if I failed to appear, the board could impose substantial fines or move forward with legal enforcement. Aunt Linda was livid. The nerve of that woman. Doesn't she have anything better to do? I started to worry about how long we could withstand the pressure. Aunt Linda lives on a fixed income, we can't afford mounting fines. And I'd only recently started a full-time job as a nurse's aide at a local clinic. I have enough on my plate caring for Aunt Linda. Fighting the HOA seemed like an uphill battle, especially with Karen so determined to punish us for something that wasn't even real. Over the next couple of weeks, every day brought a new tension. Karen sent us letters referencing specific sections of the community bylaws, highlighting words like no commercial activities or no outside vendors in bold. She took pictures of me carrying in groceries, claiming they were supplies for my supposed shop. It felt surreal and invasive. More than once, I'd glance out the window and see her phone aimed at the house, snapping pictures at random times. She seemed convinced she'd catch me servicing a line of imaginary customers. Aunt Linda tried her best to keep her spirits high, but the stress was eating at her. Each time the doorbell rang, she'd tense up, worried it was another official notice or, worse, more police. Every so often, we'd talk about tearing down the setup altogether. But Aunt Linda's doctor had specifically cautioned her against bending over in the shower, and even a seat in the tub didn't entirely prevent slips. The portable station in the garage was genuinely the safest solution. When the day of the compliance hearing arrived, my nerves were on edge. The hearing was held in the community's small meeting room, typically used for board gatherings. As we made our way there, Aunt Linda used her walker, wearing her nicest blouse as though she intended to appear before a judge in an actual courtroom. In many ways, it felt like we were on trial. Karen was already seated at a long table with a few other board members. She gave us a frosty smile that didn't reach her eyes. Scattered in front of her were photos of the evidence she'd collected, me rolling the shampoo chair into the garage, boxes labeled salon supplies, actually just hair conditioner in bulk from a discount store, and even a screenshot of a text message that she'd apparently intercepted somehow, claiming it showed I'd invited a neighbor over for a wash. In reality, it was Aunt Linda's old friend, who sometimes got her hair trimmed by me purely as a neighborly favor. We were about to make our case, but I had a sinking feeling that Karen had stacked the deck. This was more than a petty dispute. She wanted to paint me as a fraud, a violator of the HOA's precious rules. And I wasn't sure how far she'd push. The meeting opened with Karen presenting her so-called evidence. She clicked through slides of photographs on a small projector screen with a self-satisfied smirk. Each slide was more ridiculous than the last. Me carrying a plastic bin labeled shampoo, a friend's car parked outside Aunt Linda's house, even a shot of the inside of the garage with the basin visible. Karen launched into a diatribe about protecting property values and preventing unregulated businesses from destroying the peace. She claimed a neighbor had reported customers trickling in and out of the house at all hours. Aunt Linda glanced at me in shock. No one was coming and going aside from the occasional home health worker or me returning from a shift. When Karen finished, the board's president, Martin, turned the floor over to us. I cleared my throat, my palms sweating. I showed them Aunt Linda's doctor's note, which succinctly explained the necessity for a safer hairwashing setup and how it was recommended to avoid bathroom slips. I explained that I'm a trained nurse's aide and that I'm not licensed as a hairdresser because I'm not running a salon. This is strictly for Aunt Linda's personal care, I insisted. On rare occasions, if an elderly neighbor is also in need, I might help them, but there's no money exchanging hands for any of this. It's just me being neighborly. Martin nodded, but Karen cut in. Didn't you receive cash from a neighbor named Barbara? I have an email from Barbara stating she offered you payment for a trim you gave her. Doesn't that count as conducting a business? I remembered that day vividly. Barbara, who's nearly 90, had begged for a small trim because she couldn't get an appointment at her usual salon. I did it for free. She tried to hand me $10, but I politely refused. She emailed me later, thanking me and insisting to pay next time. There was no next time, I told Karen and the board. Barbara never came back, and I never asked for or accepted payment. Aunt Linda chimed in with a bit of fire in her voice. Is the HOA in the business of punishing neighbors for helping each other now? A small ripple of agreement passed through a few board members, which gave me a spark of hope. But Karen wouldn't back down. She flashed the email excerpt on the screen as though it was some smoking gun. We spent the next 20 minutes hashing out details, with Karen refusing to yield an inch. She demanded that the board impose fines to set a precedent, otherwise the community would be overrun by businesses. To our surprise, the board president expressed skepticism. "I don't see any evidence of widespread traffic or advertisements," he said, flipping through the photos again. "These pictures mostly show standard caretaker duties." That's when Karen dropped her final card. She claimed to have filed a complaint in civil court, alleging that Aunt Linda and I were in breach of the HOA's covenant and requesting an injunction to remove the setup permanently. I stared at her, stunned that she'd gone so far. Karen simply gave a thin smile. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she said, "to keep our community safe from opportunists." Aunt Linda reached for my hand under the table, her grip trembling. This wasn't just about a hearing anymore. We were facing a legal battle in court. The board meeting ended on a tense note. A few members tried to mediate, suggesting we work out a compromise, like a limited time approval for the basin, but Karen refused. She wanted it gone, period. Shortly after the hearing, I got the official court paperwork. Sure enough, Karen had filed a motion for an injunction. I was panicked, imagining thousands in legal fees. But a family friend who's a paralegal offered to help us draft a response. He found that under state and federal fair housing laws, HOAs must provide reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities or mobility issues. While Aunt Linda wasn't legally declared disabled, her doctor's statements outlining her limitations could be enough to argue this was a valid accommodation. It wasn't some frivolous business venture. The day we went to court, Karen arrived in a power suit, a smug look on her face. We had Aunt Linda's medical records, the doctor's letters, and even statements from a few neighbors who confirmed I wasn't charging for any services. The judge listened carefully, and while Karen's attorney tried to spin a story about a secret salon, the judge didn't buy it. When the judge questioned Karen directly about evidence of financial transactions or advertising, she stammered, eventually resorting to, "Well, it's all done word of mouth." The judge frowned at her. "So you're speculating?" Karen reddened, then tried to argue the community's covenant strictly banned any commercial tools or setups. But once the judge heard our explanation that this was akin to specialized equipment for an elderly resident's safe personal hygiene, the tone shifted. The judge asked if the HOA had any official guidelines for caretakers or in-home assistive devices. Karen was forced to admit there wasn't a single clause addressing that. In the end, the judge denied Karen's request for an injunction and warned her that if she continued to harass Aunt Linda or me without legitimate cause, we could potentially seek damages. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. On the steps of the courthouse afterward, she tried to pull me aside. "You might have won this round, but don't think I won't be watching," she hissed. I just shook my head, guiding Aunt Linda away. Life quieted down considerably after we won in court. Karen still eyed us suspiciously every time she drove by, and we continued to get the occasional passive-aggressive letter about routine inspections. But no police came knocking again, and the threat of fines disappeared. Word got out that Aunt Linda and I had stood up to the HOA bully and prevailed. A few neighbors even dropped off homemade cookies to celebrate, a small act of solidarity. In the following months, a new board president was elected, one who was more open to the concept of reasonable accommodations. Karen lost her position on the Architectural Compliance Committee after her repeated attempts to control every minor detail started costing the HOA in legal fees. Aunt Linda remains in her home, with me still helping her with her hair in the garage station, exactly as we intended. Now, whenever I see Karen driving by, she just scowls and avoids eye contact. I can't say it's satisfying to see her sulk, but it's a relief to live without constant fear of her next stunt. Aunt Linda and I still talk about how bizarre and unnecessary the entire ordeal was. All we ever wanted was for her to have a safe way to wash her hair. Little did we know it would take a near-court battle, a police visit, and countless sleepless nights just to keep that simple right. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that standing up to an overzealous HA can be daunting, but it's not impossible. Karen tried every intimidation tactic in the book: fines, police, lawsuits, but in the end, facts prevailed. Aunt Linda got to keep her dignity and independence, and we're closer than ever for having faced this madness together. We're hoping that after this debacle, the new board will rethink how they treat their elderly and mobility-challenged residents. Because, really, the only thing that should matter is that neighbors help each other and wash their hair in peace.